Welcome to Retro Fanfic Retrospective, the podcast where we dredge up old fanfiction and expose it to the cold, harsh light of 2020. My name is Amato, and with me are...
Tori.
And
And I've got to say, today, I had a lot of technical difficulties that we're trying to bypass here. Mm-hmm. It would have been really nice if one of you had known about this yesterday.
I know. If only it was newsworthy, then my newspaper that I get a day early would have told me.
Then the blog that I get delivered by a ferret outside my door every day.
How do you get a blog delivered?
I don't know. Print news is dead. What do you want me to do?
Well, I can easily imagine a early edition reboot where you just get tomorrow's Twitter feed through the course of the day.
That's it. Oh, no.
Yeah. But the problem is, no, you know what? I was like, it wouldn't come with a cat. But of course it would, because cats are all over the internet.
You'd get tomorrow's cat memes today.
Exactly. Yes, it would come with a cat meme each time, but it'd be like a future cat meme.
So it's like bread cat sitting on top of a stack of printed out tweets.
Exactly.
I think this idea has legs.
Yeah.
Why are we talking about tomorrow's news and cats, Amato?
Oh, it's because I am completely catering to you two specifically, and we are doing an early edition fanfic today.
As opposed to a late edition fanfic, or a...
Yeah. Something like that.
What is early edition, Amato?
I don't know. You tell me. I've never heard of it.
Watch one episode in preparation.
I actually did watch the first part of one episode, which is about all I had time for with small children.
Right.
And it was like the first episode I found that was not the pilot and was a specific episode that I could identify on YouTube. So that was season 4, episode 11, Rose, where there's like an amnesiac woman, and the detective is Major, you know, the recurring character, what's his name, who shows up in the fanfic also. Crumb, yeah, I'm an expert here. And so mostly what I got out of it was figuring out something of the tone of early edition. And so I knew that he got, for example, tomorrow's newspaper today, but I didn't know that he got tomorrow's newspaper today.
For those of you not in the know or not as knowledgeable about the show as Amato is, early edition is I think Google described it as a comedy/drama, but it's mostly drama.
I was going to say that was funny to me. It was described that way.
That ran on CBS from 1996 to 2000, I think, for about 4 seasons, at the 9 p.m. and then the 8 p.m. time slot. It was a TV show about a person in Chicago that receives tomorrow's newspaper today with a cat.
Harry Hobson.
Magic cat that delivers it. For people who don't know, a newspaper is like a blog that people used to read before like 2005 that would tell the news and events that happened like at most recent yesterday.
Never tomorrow.
No. So then this person would get tomorrow's newspaper, see all the crimes, and then they took it upon themselves to prevent all the crimes they could in Chicago in one day, every day.
Elements of Groundhog's Day, except he doesn't get a trial run or, you know, a million trial runs.
Yeah.
It's more than that. It's like, it's a story. It's like very character driven work. Like, some of my favorite shows when it was coming out at the time, you know, I was a child, but I did get a chance to rewatch part of the pilot today, and I was like, this is still like really good pacing, and it's fun, and there is humor in it, but it's mostly a drama, but the characters have like fun, you know, banter, and the acting's good, but the whole thing is like the thing that's never explained in the show is in the first episode, Gary, the main character who gets tomorrow's newspaper today for mysterious reasons, his wife throws him out. And we never find out in the show why that happened. Like, but he's broken up about it, right?
Sure
he's living in a hotel.
Have you checked the early edition wiki? Is there no info about that?
I mean, I've seen the whole show, and I did check the wiki. We never really get a clear picture as to why that happened. But I don't. You may be right. Maybe there was something else in one of the episodes that I've forgotten. But I'm pretty sure it was like, at least to the extent of like why the opening shot. I'm just going to say this is Gary comes home to their anniversary with like flowers and chocolates. And he's like, "Hi, honey, happy anniversary," from outside the window. And she's like, "Watch out," and throws his suitcase with all of his stuff packed in out the window. And it almost hits him in the head. Well, and you're just like, what?
That's nice that they told him to watch out.
It's just it's very bizarre, like, disconnect. Right?
He didn't even know that was coming. He had like no sense of it, huh?
Exactly, yeah. Anyway, he's broken up about it. And he then starts getting this newspaper. He feels a moral responsibility to help people, to save their lives, which he can. He can change the future, I guess. And so he abruptly quits his job as a stockbroker because he's already like, why are we even doing this? And he's still like miserable and depressed and lonely because he was divorced, but he like throws himself full purpose into saving people's lives. He's basically a superhero,
Yeah.
Like, his traumatic backstory is that his wife kicked him out.
Yeah, he ends up having the moral responsibility of Superman without any of Superman's powers.
Right. And the moral responsibility is very, like, a prominent theme in this fanfic specifically.
Yeah.
And in the show.
Like, it's very refrigerator horror sort of thing. Like, when you watch the show, like, yeah, that's fine, but it's like, you get the paper every day, and if you read it about somebody dying and you don't do anything, then isn't that killing them?
Yeah. That's a rough lifestyle.
Every day.
But it's funny because he has a foil who's his best friend, Chuck, who like instantly uses the paper to like trade on good stocks because he's also a stockbroker, and like bet on basketball teams, and it doesn't, doesn't care.
Does he play the
Gary
ponies with it also?
He's like, that's irresponsible. Well, I guess because when he does that, he stops getting the paper.
Yeah.
As soon as he does selfish stuff.
That was a weird thing about the show. There was this weird, like, moral magic going on with the cat. That there was rules. They didn't tell you. They just Old Testament punished you when you did wrong.
Right. And there is, like, at one point, there's a group of, like, shadowy figures who can basically teleport. And it's implied that they're like the beings that deliver the paper, but we never get that much information.
Wasn't there an episode where they talked about like the person who had the responsibility before Gary?
Oh yeah, they talk about him a lot, and Gary even gets to meet him, Lucius Snow.
Right.
I think he discovers that he existed in like season 1 because he follows the cat and he realizes the cat still visits Lucius Snow. And then by the end of the show, we realize that the power to receive the paper is passed on through this this pocket knife. What do you call this? Like utility knife, whatever you call
Swiss
that.
Army knife? Yeah,
Swiss Army knife. And the initials of the next person to receive it get engraved on it. Magic. Yeah. And so he, at the very last episode, I remember this because that was the episode, like he passed on to this little girl. And at the time I was like, what if I was that little girl?
It's too much responsibility. It was one of those shows
where I was like, oh man, that's what I want my future to be like.
Yeah, learn the lore motto.
The lore goes deeper than I thought it did. And
that's about it, though. That's not very much for 4 seasons.
Well, all the information that I have to share before we actually talk about the fanfic is about sort of how I found the fanfic and the author and stuff. And I actually have a lot more to say than usual.
Oh,
cool.
Yeah. So here's what happened is like way early on when we were doing this, Tori, you asked about early edition fanfic, and I was like, sure, if we can find a good one, then that's fine, but I couldn't find anything. And eventually I just recently took another look and found something called the EEL Awards, EEL, that's Early Edition Lover. And it was fanfic awards for early edition. And you know how like some of these fanfic awards, they go on for years and years and years. This one went on for less than 1 year because they never actually finished it. As far as they got in like the year 2000 was getting nominations up. But those nominations included categories like best author, best crossover, best romance story. And so I just looked at, what there was there. Best author, best overall story, found some overlap there. and chose someone who was nominated for Best Author and had a story nominated for Best Overall Story and decided to read that. And that is Sand and Water by, I guess, Marilee. I'm not sure how you say their handle. But that fanfic appears to have been published 2003. We also got a copy on fanfiction.net, but I'm posting to linking to the original posting on a early edition fanfic archive. You can find that link there at bit.ly/rfrsand. No, go on.
I just one question before we get into Amato. What animal is sitting on top of the fanfics that arrive outside your door every week, Amato?
All we get around here are like the occasional rabbit. It could be a rabbit.
Aw.
Cute.
I like rabbits. That's like my, childhood favorite animal because I had a stuffed rabbit.
Yeah, that's cute.
Yeah. Speaking of which, every time I walk my dog in that neighborhood, we see a rabbit, and she's always like, "What is that?" There's a lot of rabbits there.
So I've got more to say about this situation, though, because it's all very interesting. Oh. First off, looks like this was a small fandom, as might not surprise you all that much. I mentioned, Best Author and Best Story. There were a couple other authors nominated both for Best Author and who had a story, in the Best Overall Story nominations. And two of them are the proofreaders for this story. Like at the start of Sand and Water, she thanks her beta readers, Peregrine Anna and Inkling. Those are two other authors who were in that same situation in the Eel Awards. But I just I just chose the first one I could find because all I need is a reason to think something might be good. But here's the other thing. It's that this fanfic author became a successful mainstream author. Suspense and science fiction, apparently, or suspense and post-apocalyptic. MP McDonald is their pen name. You can find them on Twitter at MP McDonald2, just like you might expect to spell it. And the thing is, they've drawn on their early edition writing in their professional writing. She was kind enough to contact me, respond to me when I contacted her by email. And she said, let's see, I now write novels, and my first few may have had a slight similarity to early edition. On her fanfiction.net profile, she says specifically she's rewritten a couple of her early edition fanfics as original stories. And so her most successful series, the Mark Taylor series, has sold over 150,000 copies as of whenever the author wrote their fanfiction.net profile years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Here's the description from the author's website. Mark Taylor's just a regular guy, a photographer, who finds himself in an extraordinary situation when an antique camera he buys at a dusty Afghanistan bazaar produces photographs of future tragedies he's driven to prevent. His efforts put him in the crosshairs of the U.S. government's war on terror. And so...
Cool.
I mean, we run into a lot of fanfic authors who, went from that into successful mainstream publishing, but rarely so directly, I feel like.
Well, I want to say something about that because I think what made early editions so interesting to people is that it feels like a very tropey premise, like knowing the future and feeling responsibility. In fact, it's probably it's definitely some superpower. It's definitely some X-Men superpower or something. It happens. But the funny thing is that apparently early edition, I found out on the wiki, also inspired a Taiwanese movie, and there's been things that spun off it directly with the idea of receiving the paper. I felt like it kind of took the trope and made it into something super specific that people really latched onto.
It's interesting. It's super cool. And incidentally, the author also wrote Quantum Leap fanfiction. And I feel like there's a lot of
They made a Quantum Leap reference in that.
Yeah, I noticed that too, even though I barely know Quantum Leap. But I just feel like they're kind of similar types of shows, right? Where it's the character can be forced into a plot every episode as part of the premise.
Right.
Which means you don't have to worry about, then the plot can be whatever you want, and it can do whatever you want with the characters. And it's easy to get things moving. in both those shows, I feel like.
And also, it's a similar type of character. It's a character who is highly moral, and people like, the same thing in Quantum Leap. His holographic sidekick Al is always like, why don't you just get on with that girl? And he's like, I'm too moral. I'm in someone else's body. And like in early edition, Chuck uses the paper to like get rich, and he's like, Gary, why don't you just use it to get rich and save people? And he's like, no, I have to save people. Or like, why don't you ignore it? Like, so there's always that thing where it's like a foil who's like, I would use it for selfishly, and the hero who's like, no matter how much it hurts me, I'm gonna save people's lives or help them.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just really tickled by like the success of this author. It's really cool, and I'm happy that they got back to me on it. Her main comment about the story itself was that looking back, I think it may have been a tad melodramatic, but it was fun to write. And also that she is a respiratory therapist and was able to use some of that knowledge in writing it.
Oh, that explains so much. So much.
I was kind of wondering when I read it too.
I thought, did this person watch a lot of ER, or are they actually a medical professional?
That's what I was thinking too.
Medical professional.
Yeah, that was where I was leaning with it for sure.
Well, let's jump into the story, shall we?
Yeah.
Sorry, just cut you off, Dom.
Well, I was just thinking because when I was reading the fanfic, my mind was brought back to the time I watched it. And that was also the time I was watching ER. And like when we were talking about the device to like incubate somebody, the thing that flips out, I was remembering like 20 million different ER the show scenes.
I was remembering House MD scenes because I watched that more recently. I was obsessed with that show.
But they're both set in Chicago.
We watched ER too. I feel like you and I, Dom, might have a similar experience of like watching primetime television with our phone. Or with like a parent, you know?
Yeah,
I did not have that.
I had early edition ER, CSI, a whole bunch of stuff about things you really shouldn't be watching with kids.
Totally, yeah. But like, I don't know. It was just like that thing that you got to a certain age and your folks like, or like one of your parent or guardian finally let you stay up late enough to watch it, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess you can watch it with us, whatever. Yeah. I definitely remember times where my parents would like cover my eyes during like a sex scene in ER or something.
Yeah, I think with my parents it's more they just got tired of trying to like shoo us away or stop us from sneaking in and watching anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised at the things my mom let me see because they were things that like embarrassed her. And yet I still remember.
I had that with Whose Line Is It Anyway as a kid. Like I used to like sneak and watch it, and they're like, just come in here. You don't have to do that.
All right, we should get to the fan fiction.
Yes.
Sand and Water. Who wants to start us off kind of telling what the deal is with this story?
It definitely reads as an early edition episode in a way, but I don't think it's your average episode. And by that, I mean that basically, as we can go through the plot a little bit, but like really it starts out like an average episode. Gary's saving people, blah, 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 but he's obviously running himself ragged. And then Marissa Chuck has already left for LA, as happens in the series, to like make it big as a screenwriter. And Marissa has to go home because her mother has cancer. She has to go back to, I forget where she's from, but she has to leave the state. And Gary's doing everything by himself. And Crumb, who's running the bar at this point in the show, he used to be a detective. Now he's running the bar, and Gary owns the bar at this point. You know, for people who know early edition, Gary now owns a bar. He didn't at the start. All right. There's a detective who used to be suspicious of him named Crumb. He's not suspicious of him anymore. In fact, he quit being a detective, now works at the bar. Oh, moving on. Basically, like...
Yeah, but to the point, Crumb's not in on the secret, so he can't help directly with, like, getting all of this tomorrow's news tasks done.
But the reason he used to be suspicious of him is because he knew that Gary knew, like, specific events in the future. Gary was going to tell him what was up, and he was like, I don't want to know. So that's kind of the weird part of this is like at this point he's like, I don't know what you do or where you go, but you're running yourself ragged, kid.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like we can cover the plot fairly quickly, right? The first part of the story is kind of this tension as Gary is kind of running himself down more and like clearly exhausted and not in very good physical shape, but also not able to take care of himself because people's lives are on the line.
And also not willing to reach out for help.
Right. And like, he doesn't want to like bother Marissa while she's with her, taking care of her mom. He doesn't want to kind of pull his friend, what's his name, who's in LA now? Chuck doesn't want to pull Chuck back into this since Chuck kind of, is off starting his own life. And so the thing is, it reaches ahead relatively quickly. At the end of chapter 4, after doing a very apparently kind of standard early edition, very dramatic, life-saving thing, he collapses. And like chapter 5, he's in the hospital.
Mm-hmm. You know what's funny about this is he ends up having pneumonia, but I thought it was going to be related to the first scene where he saves a woman, but he gets his nose broken, and then he decides deliberately not to go to the hospital. So I thought that the pneumonia was going to be related to like an infection because of that. But I guess that was just an illustrating point to show that he's not taking care of himself and like not going to the hospital.
And getting beat up.
Yeah. Because what ends up happening, as we can say, is that he gets pneumonia and it's related to a spleen transplant or spleen? I don't remember exactly what it was.
Spleen removed-octomy.
Splenectomy he had after he was involved in that bombing. And sometime in season 2, I think.
I think the medical term is spleen tiki outie bye-bye.
That sounds right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's actually like kind of a moment of suspense in the story for about a chapter of them just like kind of trying to identify how he got this bad pneumonia. And there's a point where, they're talking about it usually showing up in adults with a compromised immune system for some reason. He's like, could I have HIV? And for a moment I was like, whoa, is this where the story's going to be going? But that's not where the story was going.
There was some tension there, and I appreciated it because that, for the time, was very realistic.
Yeah, like, I thought so too. Like, it was a worry that you would have, right? But like before, kind of all the diagnostics are through, or like
and this
before they really figure out what's going on.
There were like treatments or preventatives or like anything like that. It was like a very serious issue at the time. I mean, it's still a very serious issue, but even more so at the time.
More serious then, yeah, for sure. Anyway, so that's, maybe a little more than a fourth of the way through the fanfic. He's already hospitalized. And then the tension ends up coming from other directions. I'd say kind of the second segment of it is sort of the support being called in, right? And that's kind of the middle third of the fanfic, where Crumb's the only friend he's got around here. His parents are both traveling across America and not reachable because people don't have cell phones, like thing. But Gary's still like, no, like don't bother, my friends, like they shouldn't fly out here. I'm just like in the hospital. It's fine. They're taking care of me. Which then eventually, Crumb has to leak out when they end up contacting for one reason or another. And so, Chuck, as soon as he hears about this, gets super guilty over like the fact that clearly Gary was like taking on too much himself and flies back immediately. As soon as Marissa finds out, she flies back immediately. And, they're there to be there for him, as you might expect.
Yeah, but that's not where the fanfic ends.
No, one could imagine a fanfic that had that arc. And it was like, oh, Gary, you should be more willing to like reach out to your friends. And that is a message in the fanfic. That is a theme in the fanfic.
Yeah.
But that's not the arc of the fanfic.
Yeah, it gets really intense.
Yeah, it goes places I was not expecting. Because basically, and we're moving through this quickly, but I think it's an appropriate overview, right?
Yeah.
Gary has, a long recovery process, and, things are touch and go for a while there, and it's all very tense. But even once he's kind of through the worst of the pneumonia and like his life is no longer in danger, he still has to like recover for weeks, physically to get better.
Yeah.
And Chuck, of course, who is full of guilt over, having kind of abandoned Gary and like not, helping out with all this stuff, is like, look, I'll take care of the newspaper stuff.
Yeah.
And then it goes, I feel like, interesting places with that.
It's like you really expect Chuck to step up and prove themselves and show but they get fed up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Gary even said that. He was like, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" And that's kind of where it goes, right?
Yeah. I mean, he has good intentions. He's going in there trying to, he wants to support Gary and take this off his plate and, deal with it. But it starts off with not priority. What's the word I'm looking for? It's the level of seriousness that Gary needs to see to step in and intervene in something is a lot lower than what Chuck is willing to deal with. And so if no one's dying to start off with, Chuck starts complaining pretty quickly about going and fixing problems that no one was gonna die, it's fine, someone robbed a bank, whatever.
Yeah, there was a fire in a restaurant. Nobody died. Whatever. Why do I have to do anything?
Yeah, and I mean, you can see that point of view too. You can't fix everything. It kind of makes sense to triage it. And he has a couple of bad experiences, dealing with that sort of situation, with the bank robbery. He goes south, and he's not able to prevent it at all, and he makes an embarrassment of himself and all this kind of thing. But then
he tries.
He does try.
There was another situation where I was really oh man, right? Do y'all remember what that one was?
The latrine, the porta potty one?
Yeah, he was. That was nuts, by the way. But he was basically I don't. There was an elderly gentleman in kids put some cherry bombs in the outhouse. An elderly gentleman, I don't remember if he died or if he got seriously injured, but it was significant. But Chuck was just nah, I'm not going to deal with that. Of course, he eventually did, but for some reason he had this moral justification of but he's an old man, or was that what that one was?
Oh no, it was more about the drunk teen.
Oh, that's what that one was. Okay, yeah, there was one where he had a moral justification for helping someone.
That's where it kind of comes to a head.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, in general, other than just only feeling they should bother saving lives, even with the saving lives, Chuck burns out pretty quickly. And like you said, this lifestyle is crazy, right? You just kind of have to center your whole life around fighting these fires every day, right?
Yeah.
And so it felt really interesting that the author wasn't just the author let the character not be up to this, which I feel was an unusual choice. And so, Tori,
it's fair for the character. I mean, it's exactly what.
But even though he's trying to be a good friend, trying to be a good guy and trying to step up, it comes to a head where Chuck is already kind of worn down. And there is this situation where some kid gets drunk and drowns in the ocean. And, Chuck, who has come back and just wants a good meal. He's been out all day, whatever. He's look, it's the kid's own fault. I'm not going to go risk my life or, I'm not even going to interrupt this meal because I just really need to sit down and have a meal to save this guy from the consequences of his own actions.
And Gary was do you want to save a life or do you want to have lunch? He was I want to have lunch.
Right.
And Mara, I don't think there's any oceans next to Chicago.
Oh, there's
not ocean, lake. Where is it?
The super big lake.
So that big lake next to Chicago, yeah.
Yes, the super big lake. That's what we call it.
I should probably know.
It is one of the super big, one of the super big lakes for sure. But I do want to say, I feel we're kind of. I know I kind of fast tracked us into that because I was trying to remember all the things that happened with Chuck, but before he even takes on the responsibility of the paper, there's actually a lot that happens with Gary's health that's super dramatic.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, like we mentioned, he refuses to call on people until Crumb finally realizes that he's in the hospital and calls everybody else. And there's a really intense scene where Chuck and Marissa are standing in the room and Gary is crashing, almost dying. And what's super poignant about it, Marissa is blind, right? So she can't see anything that's going on. And like, there's a moment where after all this is happening, she's just listening to the chaos, and Chuck's standing there shocked and horrified as they're trying to revive him. And this is the part that was super medical, where they bring out, the scope, the metal scope that opens the mouth, and they bag him and all that. And there's a moment where like everything's going on and it gets quiet. And then Marissa's like, is he? And Chuck's like, oh my God, no, he's not dead. He's not dead. he loses, he forgets that Marissa can't like see because he's so distracted. And it was a really intense scene. And there's a lot of medical stuff like leading up before this. I just wanted to bring that up because those were well described. So
no, you're right. The second third of it is like an ER episode, in a dramatic, effective way.
Well, and very emotional for these characters. And so I guess the author's medical experience is really coming out there.
Yeah, it's always fun seeing that kind of thing, like back with Tropical Storm, right? Where the author had worked in tech companies in Florida, and that was their thing. And so like that knowledge just oozed out of it. It's the same thing here.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, to wrap up the main plot, Gary, who still probably shouldn't be dealing with this stuff and should be staying home and resting, is forced to like go out and try to save this drowning kid. And, Chuck comes in after him and kind of saves him he was trying to save the kid, whatever. And then they sort of have this like final conversation about the paper and the paper responsibilities, where Chuck is guilty, of course, but he also says, I'm just not cut out for this sort of thing here. And saving people is something you love. It's like what you live for, but that's not who I am. And I'm not going to be like that no matter how hard I try. And so he ends up going back to LA. It's interesting because I feel like out of all the pacing things in the story, the ending felt just slightly abrupt. I wasn't sure what I was expecting for the ending, but I was kind of expecting like one more thing at the end.
I totally agree with that. Though I think what the author was trying to evoke was to reiterate Gary's sense of... It also seemed at the beginning that they were trying to say, obviously he's going to die if he doesn't get help from the people around him. So to have Chuck, as you would expect the character to do from the source, so it's good the characters are true to life, goes back to LA, he's like, I can't handle the responsibility. That's basically what he did in the first.
Right.
Marissa's still there. That's great. She's always been a good friend and like a kind person as well, but she can't help. She's got her own stuff. But it does feel like kind of a non-resolution. Like the whole conflict was he's running himself into the ground to the point where he almost died. And at the end, nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was a series of incidents that happened. I think there wasn't any real character arcs. Right? Am I missing something?
I mean, Chuck has a character arc of sorts, except he ends up in the same place, just with a renewed, it's kind of like one of those doubting, but then getting your resolution back sort of arcs.
Right.
Except that in his case, he's doubting whether he wants to avoid the responsibility of the paper. And he's like, no, I want to avoid the responsibility of the paper, which is not the direction that such an arc might usually go.
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately a responsible decision to come to not try to help when you can't, but like...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's aware of what he's able to do. And it kind of like makes me think of professions like medical personnel, right? Where it takes a lot of emotional work, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to burn out or to like kind of let yourself suffer or be worn down by the pressures of that job. And it's just not for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, but it's not even for Gary. And that's the hard part about this ending is it ends with Gary goes, I understand, Chuck. And Gary was surprised to find that he did understand. The paper had never been important to Chuck. It had been a lark and adventure while it lasted. One that Chuck was more than ready to put behind him. This was the way it was meant to be. And then his friend says, if you ever need me, though, just give me a holler. He's like, yeah, Chuck, I will. And I think maybe the idea was that Gary was going to rely on Chuck as emotional support more. But really, I thought what was set up at the beginning is that he needed help beyond what he was getting. So it's a little confusing. It's like what he comes to his conclusion is he finally understands Chuck, but that's not what was set up for us at the start. It was that Gary needs to not die from overexerting himself.
Yeah, they presented several problems, but they didn't provide any explanation or thoughts on them, really.
Yeah, and I mean, it might be also one of those, it's the type of story where the author is trying to allow it to fit within the continuity, right? Like there wouldn't be a conflict. This could be an episode of early edition that would not derail other things that happened later on, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, like the status quo does not get shaken up. And I understand that. And I do still kind of appreciate that it was a good read in that I didn't know where it was going several times. Like the dramatic tension was very good, I felt like.
Yeah.
I wasn't... I kind of had like anxiety about like what was going to happen at multiple points in the story.
Yeah, the scenes they describe, the medical scene in particular, are very engaging, and it seems like, I mean, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it seems like this fan fiction was kind of set up in order to display those medical situations and those themes, and they also described like the emotional state that both the person doing it and the people watching it experience when something like that happens all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So
it's certainly the strongest point and the central point of the story. Yeah.
Yeah. And because of that, this fanfic was very moving. I was moved reading it, but I don't have a point I haven't mentioned before.
You were just trying to say that like the character work seems kind of secondary.
Yeah, it was more exhibition sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And for that reason, it doesn't quite seem like early edition. But at the same time, I can imagine it being like, I know, like a kind of like special episode where I just wish there'd been more revealed. It seems like sort of just stalled, or I don't know,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, while I'm thinking about it, Tori, you want to tell us about that Quantum Leap shout out?
Oh, yes. It's hilarious. So, like, I love this because it's such a cute thing to see an author from this time period, making references to another show I really liked when I was a kid. It made me think of being a kid. So Chuck is off in LA. Gary finally gets a chance to talk to him. He hasn't had a chance to talk to him in a while. Chuck's telling him all about his new screenplay pitch. And he's like, oh, it's about a guy who travels to the future. And it's like it's Quantum Leap with a couple of things changed. Like he travels to the future and something else is different. Because in Quantum Leap, he can only travel into the past. And
I thought it was very specifically Quantum Leap.
No, it was slightly
I'm trying to find this again.
And it was called a Quantum Leap. I want to find it because it was really funny. But Gary has a response where he just kind of like thinks, oh, should I tell him? Oh, I guess not. Like, obviously, Quantum Leap exists in this universe. He doesn't realize he's ripping it off. It was kind of funny.
I've got it. I see what's happening here. The author wrote a early edition Quantum Leap crossover called And Then There Were Two. Oh. The description is Sam leaps into Chicago, 1997, to save Gary Hobson. And so when he's describing the situation, Chuck is describing that dream he had last winter, unquote, where he had gone into the future and someone jumped into me, sort of trading place with me. And so he's pitching a show based on his experience of being, shunted into the future because he was the leapee in the Quantum Leap story.
Got it. Okay.
And that's why his pitch is just slightly different from like the main Quantum Leap premise,
right? Because the people go into the future when he leaps and Sam leaps in their bodies. Okay, Okay, but still, it was weird that Gary's reaction was that, because it seemed like he knew quantum leap was a thing, or maybe he knew that happened. I don't know.
I don't think he knows quantum leap is a thing. I don't think quantum leap exists in this timeline.
I guess not, but like, why does he have the reaction he does?
Oh,
like, should I tell him? I guess not.
Gary had almost dropped the phone at the mention of the title. If only Chuck knew. Well, that's got to be something about the fanfic crossover that the author wrote.
I thought that was because he knew quantum leap was already a thing. That does change it, though.
That would be funny if you, but I think you should maybe tell your friend if they're about to, like, you know, step on too.
Good point.
That's already a show.
Yeah.
I thought maybe he just didn't want to bring him down, you know, at the moment. But anyway, all right.
Mm-hmm. Anything else that we want to talk about kind of in the story over the course of it before we wrap up this discussion?
The only parts I have highlighted are the descriptions of medical things.
Is there anything you want to talk about with that, or like want to read out?
Well, like, it was interesting because they described a lot what it looked like. What do I have here? Okay, now roll the other way. Gary obeyed, clinging to the side rail of the bed, as one nurse put a clean sheet on half the bed and bunched the excess sheet in a roll behind Gary's back. A nurse's aide had one hand on Gary's shoulder, the other behind his knee. She helped him to stay on his side. Gary was grateful that she was there, because just the act of rolling on his left side left him breathless. His knuckles were turning white from his grip on the rails. It's little things like that where, like, the day-to-day life of somebody in a hospital that you wouldn't think about, but when you're there, you would be very observant, and it was described very specifically. I felt like I was watching it more than reading, you know?
I love that in particular because that's exactly how you change a sheet.
Yeah.
Like, I've been a caregiver. That's exactly how you do it. Like, they knew what they were talking about, and those little details really brought it to life. Like, and it's weird because it's like, I think for someone else who doesn't have that experience, they may have been like, reading it like, why are they being so specific? But for me, I'm like, yes, bring the details.
What the experience is that, like, the author knows everything that's going on, but like the way it's narrated and described is someone who doesn't know and who's seeing it for like the first time and experiencing it.
Right, because they also do that thing where they don't give specific name, you know, to any of the things that they use medically. Yeah,
they describe what it looks like and what it sounds like, what it seems like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
where they're like,
well done.
They hear the medical professionals say bag him, and then they describe the purple squeezy thing that looks like a football, and then they assume that's what it means to bag him, you know. And it's like, yeah, of course, if you ever watched a medical show, you know. But I like the description was there, but it was from the character's perspective.
You really inhabited the perspective of someone trying to pick up things from context clues in a very hectic moment.
Totally. And like, this was also a time before there were a ton of medical dramas. Like, there was ER, but like not as many. So understanding that was not as common.
I did recognize the intubation tool from ER. Yeah.
My favorite little medical detail is when Crumb, like how Gary's doing, and he asks, what room he's in, and the nurse has a conversation with him, and he's been transferred to intensive care, and the nurse gave him directions and added quietly, "You might think about becoming related to Mr. Hobson. Otherwise, they won't let you in to see him." And that starts a whole tiny little subplot where, like, Crumb is claiming to be Gary's father, and then when Chuck comes in, he's claiming to be, Gary's brother, and they're both really bad at keeping that up, especially Chuck.
And Chuck's the one who gives away the whole thing.
Yeah, but the actual medical professionals don't really care because that's the hospital policy, but if they're actually like friends of Gary's, that's fine. Yeah. And it just like felt very like real and human in kind of like how the medical professionals are handling this.
Yeah. Like the doctors and the nurses knew that there was nobody else that could help the person or knew the person that was in town. So like, of course it'd be nice to have someone around.
Yeah. Though I feel like maybe, I don't know, like I appreciated it because the doctor was like, I realize you're not related. I'm going to pretend you're related still, even after he realizes it. And the nurse is like, just pretend. I don't think that's as realistic. Like, I don't think I understand that they're not caring and that's good. if they're related because they care about the people who can help him. But I don't think that's very realistic necessarily. Like a doctor, especially being, look, I don't care if you're related. Like, let me just tell you anyway.
I think it was a nice conceit for the story, pretty much.
Yeah, it made the people seem really nice, and I like that.
Because that made you more on the side of the doctors and such, like knowing that they're on the side of the characters, right?
Totally.
And it's something where they addressed that realistically. It would bog down the story and something that wasn't really worth it.
It was cute. It was cute.
Okay. Well, it's not the longest story. It's, less than 20,000 words. And I think we've talked through the main points. So let's start to close this out. We say things that we want to complain about in the story, especially if we haven't mentioned them before, and then we praise things in the story on our way out. So what are our complaints? I would say the story does seem kind of uneven in that like the middle part's the strongest, and the latter third, while kind of interesting, doesn't seem like quite the same story.
Yeah. I was going to say it felt like three not similar, but three different stories kind of strung together, and it was kind of missing the momentum of a complete circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Like, they start out at the beginning very clearly suggesting that Gary's running himself ragged. Then they put him in the hospital for over a third of the story, and he almost dies, like, in a very dramatic way. And at the end, I don't know. He accepts that Chuck doesn't want to do the paper. Like, it did feel incomplete. Even though each part sat by itself very well, I don't know if they came full circle.
Yeah, and that's my major complaint. I mean, I've seen like no early edition, but of the like 10 minutes that I did see, characters seem to be in character, and the mannerisms seem to be in place, and the writing is generally kind of strong and pulling people along, I think. Do you have any other complaints?
Not really.
So,
yeah, that is true. And very little Marissa.
A lot of the time she's on screen, she's crying over Gary, which she does because she's a very understanding person who cares a lot. But I wanted her to do more of her badass stuff. Yeah,
they brought Marissa in pretty late in the story when things were getting bad for Gary.
Yeah.
Not enough cats.
There's a usual amount of cats.
Yeah.
Standard issue cat.
Cat is there to look pretty at the beginning of the episode, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And make noise.
Yeah.
Like the alarm rings and the cat meows, and then the cat runs away. That's basically all the cat does. Most of the time. There's some episodes where the cat's really important, but they're few and far between.
But yeah, it's the sound of the paper thumping in front of the door along with the cat meowing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, what do we want to praise?
I'll say it again. The medical details and we didn't give any examples, but when things were getting bad in the hospital room, and the way to describe it, you got nervous. I think I got nervous listening to it. They really did good portraying that sense of being there, being in the moment, and how this isn't a huge TV plot. There's no bomb in the hospital, and there's no supernatural ghost. It's just this is just somebody is sick, and you just have to deal with it. But they make it feel emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I also got nervous, and in a good way, where I was engaged with the reading.
Yeah.
I think that's the strongest point. And we've talked about that. I guess I also, a little bit more explicitly, the sorts of events that Gary and then later what's his face are trying to avert feel, from my limited knowledge, they feel very early edition in an entertaining kind of way.
Yeah.
They're all these eventful things, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes ridiculous, sometimes serious, but all these sorts of little modular, eventful little things that like someone can go muck around with and avert, right?
I wonder,
and like the flavor felt there.
I wonder if in the early edition writer's room there was just like a big like jar with a whole bunch of post-it notes with a bunch of like little events that happened that they could just pull out randomly.
Probably a lot of newspapers, to be honest, like drawing on real world events.
Real future events.
Oh, also, I thought that, so in the beginning of the story, they protect a kid that's fallen out a window and gets kicked in the face. And then they start feeling sick, and then they have to stop a murder. And they talked about the situation, and it felt like an early edition episode where like they had the clues, and like the person working there, that he's trying to get them to just help them, damn it, but they don't understand what's going on. And they had a woman there and like a murderer, and they ended up saving the woman. I thought that would turn into a plot line. I was wondering where that went. And why they had, why it was that involved if they weren't going to do something with it.
You know, that's a really good point. I mean, I want to give my praise, but I also want to pick up on the fact I forgot that the woman he saved seems like a potential like romantic interest, and said she's going to call him, and she does. But Chuck's the one who answers the machine, and he almost listens to the private message, but then doesn't. But we never get to hear that message from Gary's perspective.
Yeah, I actually missed that. That's who that was calling on the machine, because it was so long ago I'd forgotten.
And like Chuck skips the message. He's like, "Oh, I'm not going to listen to Gary's personal life," but it never comes up again. Some things don't.
Well, I think that was just more flavor, which seemed good.
Yeah, I guess
flavor of like Gary having a broader life that is not being fully addressed, and of just kind of a Chuck character moment, right?
Sure.
I guess, but like considering the show, like how few and far between Gary's like potentials for even like not just saving the world all the time, or well, I guess saving just specific people and actually having a relationship are, it seems like that should have been something more. But I guess it does happen in the show too, where he connects with women, but he can never make it work because he's too busy.
Right.
And that being said, that's kind of my praise. This is very on theme. I like that the author took this to the point where he actually gets so physically sick, because that is his character flaw, is that he pushes himself so hard. But it also brings up that conundrum of like, he keeps getting the paper, like he basically has to do this. I mean, he could choose any time to stop. And maybe that's what Chuck as a foil represents. It's like, maybe he should stop. But I like that the author took it to where I think it should go. Like there are definitely moments where his life is suffering from this, but like, if you imagine what he's really going through day to day, this would probably happen. Mm-hmm. He's saving every single person every day. He'd probably end up in the hospital. It was very logical.
All right. Well, overall, I'm very glad that I was able to find an early edition story for us to read and enjoy. And I did enjoy reading it. And if you liked early edition or ER, then I might suggest checking out this story. Again, you can find a link there at bit.ly/RFR. What did I say? Sand. That's what I'm going with.
Oh, why is it called? What's the title? Sand and
Water?
Yeah. Why is it called Sand and Water?
I assumed it was just kind of a reference to like the climactic saving the drowning kid's life, but there's probably something more metaphorical going on there, right?
Oh, yeah.
It might be a reference to something.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, that's a good Lipa motto, because like it's kind of the climax almost, where Chuck doesn't want to save this kid, and then he saves Gary because Gary almost killed himself saving the kid on the beach.
Yeah.
Sand and Water is an album released by Beth Nielsen Chapman. I don't know if that's what it is.
I don't know. Doesn't sound quite right. If this kind of early edition story appeals to you, then you can also check out MP McDonald's writing. There's mpmcdonald.com. The first book in that Mark Taylor series, which seems to be early edition inspired. First book is called No Good Deed. a psychological thriller. And let's see. And I guess we're going to close it out. I don't think I have a next week fanfic decided yet. So I don't have anything to say right now. And Dom, you can just edit this out later.
Okay.
Or not, if people just want to hear my voice more.
I know I do.
I know I do.
I assumed they did.
Why do you think I started this podcast? So I can read fanfic? No. So I can listen to more Amato voice.
Who wants to read fanfiction, right?
Great.
Not me.
That's not even official.
I mean, if people's lives weren't riding on this, I would not be keeping this up every week. As for this was episode 89 of Retro Fanfic Retrospective. Sand and Water by Marilee was the former handle, but MP McDonald is the author's author name.
I like the writing. I'd check out some of the other stuff they wrote. Seems promising.
If I had time to read other things, I might too. The intro song for the podcast is The Weekly Fair off of the album Popey's Incredible Adventure by Komiku. The outro song is Run Against the Universe from the same album. You can find this album and other works by Komiku at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. You can find our website at retrofanficretrospective.podbean.com or bit.ly/retrofanfic. And if you have questions, comments, or thoughts about the episode, you can find us on Twitter or Reddit or Instagram or Facebook at retrofanfic or occasionally retrofanfic retrospective. You can also send us an email at retrofanficretrospective@gmail.com, or you can leave comments or reviews on the podcast service that you use. I'm Amato.
I'm Tori.
I'm Dom.
We're just three Earth life forms trying to be nice to each other today. Until next time, take care.
So your fanfic rabbit, right? Does it leave you like a floppy disk in front of your door?
Yeah, but I've never been able to read them because I don't have